Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's meditation. Welcome to this beautiful new day. We're going to gently bring ourselves into the day with some meditations and readings. Oh, Facebook's letting me know this is my 50th broadcast today. Wow, okay. If you're just joining, say hi and where you're tuning in from, because it's just showing me a number, it's not showing me that there's anybody there at the moment. So, blessings for this new day. I'm going to start by reading today's date out of Opening Doors Within by Eileen Cady. That's this book. And Eileen is the founder of the Findhorn spiritual community in Scotland. So today's date is October the 30th. Learn to give freely of all that you have. Learn also to receive graciously all that is given to you, and use it wisely for the expansion and betterment of the whole. When you give, give freely and do not count the cost. That which is given in the right spirit, wholeheartedly and in its purest love, will bring great joy and blessings to many and will multiply and grow. Always remember, let there be no strings attached to what you give. Give and then forget about it. When you do a good job, do it with love and be grateful that you have the gift and ability to do it. Do it perfectly. And never do it for what you can get out of it. When you can learn to do everything to my honour and glory, then you will have learnt the art of true giving. You will find the greatest joy in everything you give, and your whole attitude and outlook will be right. Morning, John. Please feel free to share this. I think you can click at the bottom. I can't do it, but anybody who's watching can just press share or invite friends. So please feel free to do that. It would be lovely to get a few more people. So that was an extract from Opening Doors Within by Eileen Cady. And this morning, I've just been and looked at my bookshelf. I've got lots of books now, but I don't generally read any of them. But what I'm decided to do is to start to read them, and when I read them, to share them with you, because I think that's far more beneficial for everybody for me to share them here. So this book is called Buddhism Without Beliefs, A Contemporary Guide to Awakening by Stephen Batchelor. This is the front. I know you can see that backwards, which is probably not ideal. This book belonged to my dad, and has found its way into my experience. I think I'm going to read these two quotes at the beginning actually as well for you all. And if you've just joined, say, please do say who you are and where you're joining in from. Thanks, John. Nice to have you here. Emperor Wu of Liang asked the great master Bodhidharma, what is the highest meaning of the holy truths? Bodhidharma said, empty without holiness. And the emperor said, who is facing me? Bodhidharma replied, I don't know. That's from the Blue Cliff Record. We do not receive wisdom. We must discover it for ourselves after a journey through the wilderness, which no one else can make for us, which no one else can spare us. For our wisdom is the point of view from which we come at last to regard the world. That's by Marcel Proust. thought I would read this from the first part, which is awakening. I think that's very appropriate. Let's start there. Awakening. As long as my vision was not fully clear regarding four ennobling truths, I did not claim to have realized authentic awakening. The Buddha. Let's go back to the beginning, to the awakening of Siddhartha Gautama, aka Tathagata Sakayamuni, the world-honoured one, the Buddha himself. He was the one who set the wheel of Dharma spinning in the first place. He was the one who pointed out the central path, the famous middle way. He was the trailblazer. His are the footprints we will find at the end of the track. Let's start with Buddha's first discourse, delivered to his 5 former ascetic companions in the Deer Park at Sanath, near Benares. It was here, several weeks after the awakening and his ensuing ambivalence about saying anything at all, that compassion moved him to embrace the anguish of others. Plunging into the treacherous sea of words, he set in motion the wheel of the Dharma. This short discourse can be summed up as follows. The Buddha declares how he has found the central path through avoiding indulgence and mortification. He then describes 4 ennobling truths, those of anguish, its origins, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessation. Anguish, he says, is to be understood, its origins to be let go of, its cessation to be realized, and the path to be cultivated. And this is precisely what he himself has done. He has understood anguish, let go of its origins, realized its cessation, and cultivated the path. Only through knowing these truths, knowing how to act upon them, and knowing that he has acted upon them, can he claim to have found authentic awakening. Morning, Dave. Morning, Thomas. If you've just joined, I'm reading from Buddhism Without Beliefs, a book by Stephen Batchelor. Despite the Buddha's own succinct account of his awakening, it has come to be represented, even by Buddhists, as something quite different. Awakening has become a mystical experience, a moment of transcendent revelation of the truth. Religious interpretations invariably reduce complexity to uniformity, while elevating matter-of-factness to holiness. Over time, increasing emphasis has been placed on the single absolute truth, such as the deathless, the unconditioned, the void, nirvana, Buddha nature, etc., rather than on the interwoven complex of truths, and the crucial distinction that each truth requires being acted upon in its own particular way. Understanding anguish, letting go of its origins, realizing its cessation, and cultivating the path. Morning, Sass. Lovely to have you all here. Has been relegated to the margins of specialist doctrinal knowledge. Few Buddhists today are probably even aware of this distinction. Yet failing to make this distinction, 4 ennobling truths to be acted upon are neatly turned into 4 propositions of fact to be believed. The first truth becomes, life is suffering. The second, the cause of suffering is craving, and so on. At precisely this juncture, Buddhism becomes a religion. A Buddhist is someone who believes these 4 propositions. In levelling out these truths into propositions that claim to be true, Buddhists are distinguished from Christians, Muslims and Hindus, who believe different sets of propositions. The 4 ennobling truths become principal dogmas of the belief system known as Buddhism. Buddha was not a mystic. His awakening was not a shattering insight into a transcendent truth that revealed to him the mysteries of God. He did not claim to have had an experience that granted him privileged esoteric knowledge of how the universe ticks. Only as Buddhism became more and more of a religion with such grandiose claims imputed to his awakening. In describing to the 5 ascetics what his awakening meant, he spoke of having discovered complete freedom of heart and mind from the compulsions of craving. He called such freedom the taste of Dharma. The Buddha awoke from the sleep of existential confusion. So shocking and unexpected was this experience that he initially assumed that were he to speak of it, no one would understand him. A person who is asleep is either lost in deep unconsciousness or absorbed in a dream. Metaphorically, this was how the Buddha must have seen both his previous self as well as everyone else he had known. They either were blind to the questions of existence or sought consolation from them in a metaphysical or religious fantasy. His awakening, however, brought both the questions and their resolutions into vivid and unanticipated focus. The Buddha woke up to the nature of the human dilemma and a way to its resolution. The first 2 truths, anguish and its origins, describe the dilemma. The second 2, cessation and the path, is resolution. He awoke to a set of interrelated truths rooted in the immediacy of experience here and now. The Buddha experienced these truths as ennobling. Awakening was not just the acquisition of a more enlightened viewpoint. It granted a natural integrity, dignity and authority of his life. Although the 5 ascetics had vowed not to acknowledge their apostate former companion, as he had entered the deer park in Sarnath and came towards them, they found themselves standing up to offer him respect. In spite of themselves, they were unable to resist the authority of Gautama's presence. An unawakened existence in which we drift unaware on a surge of habitual impulses is both ignoble and undignified. Instead of a natural and non-coercive authority, we impose our will on others, either through manipulation and intimidation, or by appealing to the opinions of those more powerful than ourselves. Authority becomes a question of force rather than integrity. Instead of presenting himself as a saviour, the Buddha saw himself as a healer. He presented his truths in the form of a medical diagnosis, prognosis and treatment. If you have a pain in your chest, you first need to acknowledge it. Then you will go to a doctor for an examination. His diagnosis will both identify the cause of the pain and tell you if it's curable. If it is curable, he will advise you to follow a course of treatment. Likewise, the Buddha acknowledged the existential condition of anguish. On examination, he found its origins to lie in self-centered craving. He realized that this could cease and prescribed the cultivation of a path of life embracing all aspects of human experience as an effective treatment. While Buddhism suggests another belief system, Dharmic practice suggests a course of action. The 4 ennobling truths are not propositions to believe, they are challenges to act. There is a passage in Alice's Adventures in Wonderland in which Alice enters a room to find a bottle marked with the label "Drink Me." The label does not tell Alice what is inside the bottle, but tells her what to do with it. When the Buddha presents his 4 truths, he first describes what each referred to, then enjoined his listeners to act upon them. Once we grasp what he refers to by anguish, we are enjoined to understand it, as though it bore the label, understand me. The truth of anguish becomes an injunction to act. The first truth challenges our habitual relationship to anguish. In the broad sense, it challenges how we relate to our existence as such, our birth, sickness, aging and death. To what extent do we fail to understand these realities and their implications? How much time is spent in distraction or oblivion? When are we gripped by a worry, for example, what do? We might struggle to shake it off, or we might try to convince ourselves that things are not the way they seem, failing which we seek to preoccupy ourselves with something else. How often do we embrace that worry, accept our situation, and try to understand it? Anguish maintains its power only as long as we allow it to intimidate us. By habitually regarding it as fearful and threatening, we fail to see the words etched upon it by the Buddha, understand me. If we try to avoid a powerful wave looming above us on the beach, it will send us crashing into the sand and surf, but if we face it head on and dive right into it, we discover only water. To understand a worry is to know it calmly and clearly for what it is, transient, contingent, and devoid of intrinsic identity. Whereas to misunderstand it is to freeze it into something fixed, separate, and independent. Worry about whether a friend still likes us, for example, becoming an isolated thing rather than part of a process emerging from a stream of contingencies. This perception induces, in turn, a mood of feeling psychologically blocked, stuck, obsessed. The longer this undignified state persists, the more we become incapable of action. The challenge of the first truth is to act before habitual action incapacitates us. If you've just joined us, I'm reading from Buddhism Without Beliefs, A Contemporary Guide to Awakening by Stephen Batchelor. And I'm reading the first chapter, which is called Awakening. A similar procedure can be applied to the other truths. Just as the presence of anguish is an opportunity for understanding, so the presence of the self-centered craving that underlies it is an opportunity for letting go. Such craving is manifest in a variety of ways. It extends from simple egoism and selfishness to a deep-seated anxious longing for security, to fear of rejection by those we love, to the compulsion to have a cigarette. Whatever such feelings arise, the habitual reaction is either to indulge them or deny them, which again blinds us to this phrase stamped on by the Buddha, let go. Yes, Joanne, that's lovely. Letting go is not a euphemism for stamping out craving by other means. As with anguish, letting go begins with understanding, a calm and clear acceptance of what is happening, while craving, the second truth, may be the original or cause of the anguish, the first truth. This does not mean that they are two separate things, any more than a sprout is separate from the daffodil that emerges from it. Just as cravings crystallize into anguish, so does understanding flower into letting go. Letting go of a craving is not rejecting it, but allowing it to be itself. A contingent state of mind at once arisen will pass away. Instead of forcibly freeing ourselves from it, notice how its very nature is to free itself. To let go is like releasing the snake that you have been clutching in your hand. By identifying with a craving, I want this, I don't want that, you tighten the clutch and intensify its resistance. Instead of being a state of mind that you have, it becomes a compulsion that has you. As with understanding anguish, the challenge in letting go of craving is to act before habitual reactions incapacitate us. By letting go of craving, it will finally cease. This cessation allows us to realize, if only momentarily, the freedom, openness and ease of the central path. This sudden gap in the rush of self-centered compulsion and fear allows us to see with ambiguous immediacy and clarity the transcendent, unreliable and contingent nature of reality. Dharma practice at this moment has relinquished the last traces of belief. It is founded on authentic vision, born from experience. It no longer requires the support of moralistic rules and religious ritual. It is grounded in integrity and creative autonomy. In revealing life in all its vulnerability, it becomes a doorway to compassion. Everything is just passing through us. All that we are experiencing is momentary, is not fixed, it's transient. But as soon as we believe that it's fixed, that it has, and then it begins to have some hold over us. It's our thoughts about what's happening that creates our suffering, not what's happening. Once we label things through our conditioning, that creates our suffering. And there is nothing wrong with desire. Desire is God willing life into being through us. But our attachment to desire, that will cause the suffering. Desire itself is not suffering. Our attachment to an outcome could cause suffering. Yes, in my own experience, suffering is very transformational, and some of us have to get to the depths of it to want to come out of it, to want to know the truth, to be pushed so deeply into it that all there is left is to surrender, and all that is left is truth. I'll go back to reading. In the cessation of craving, we touch that dimension of experience that is timeless, the playful, unimpeded continuancy of things emerging from conditions, only to become conditions for something else. This is emptiness, not a cosmic vacuum, but the unborn, undying, infinitely creative dimension of life. It is known as the womb of awakening. It is the clearing in the still centre of becoming, the track on which the centred person moves, and it whispers, "Realise me." But as soon as it is glimpsed, then it is gone. Cessation, craving is like a momentary gap in the clouds. The sun shines brilliantly for a few moments, only to be covered again. We find ourselves back in the humbling fog of anguish, craving, habit, restlessness, distraction. But with a difference, now we know where this track goes. We have set foot in its territory, for which these words are just a map. We realise that until this point we have not really been on the path at all. We've been following hunches, heeding the words of those we respect, exploring blind alleys, stumbling and guessing. No matter how strong our resolve and conviction, all along there may have been a nagging unease that we didn't really know where we were going. Each step felt hesitant and forced, and we were terribly alone. The difference between then and now is like the idea of sex and the first experience of it. On the one hand, the act is momentous and irrevocable. On the other, it is just a part of life. Hence, resolve to cultivate this path becomes unwavering yet entirely natural. It is simple what we do. There is no longer any sense of self-consciousness, contrivance, awkwardness, or hesitation. Awakening is longer seen as something to attain in the distant future, for it is not a thing but a process, and this process is the path itself. But neither does this render us in any way perfect or infallible. We are quite capable of subverting this process to the interests of our far from extinct desires, ambitions, hatreds, jealousies, and fears. We have not been elevated to the lofty heights of awakening. Awakening has been knocked off its pedestal into the turmoil and ambiguity of everyday life. There is nothing particularly religious or spiritual about this path. It encompasses everything we do. It is an authentic way of being in the world. It begins with how we understand the kind of reality we inhabit and the kinds of beings we are that inhabit such a reality. Such a vision underpins the values that inform our ideas, the choices we make, the words we utter, the deeds we perform, and the work we do. It provides the ethical ground for mindful and focused awareness, which in turn further deepens our understanding of the kind of reality we inhabit and the kind of beings we are that inhabit such a reality, and so on. To cultivate these diverse elements of our existence means to nurture them as we would a garden. Just as a garden needs to be protected, tended, and cared for, so does ethical integrity, focused awareness, and understanding. No matter how deep our insight into the empty and contingent nature of things, that alone will do little to cultivate these qualities. Each of these areas in life becomes a challenge, an injunction to act. There is no room for complacency, for they all bear a tag that declares, "Cultivate me." I'll read a little bit more, but I think now we'll go into some silence and meditation. And if you've just joined us, I've been reading from Buddhism Without Beliefs by Stephen Batchelor, a beautiful book that I found on my shelf this morning. So let's take some deep breaths now. And if you're just joining us, we're going to go into a meditation and then I will continue reading. So taking some deep breaths, bringing ourselves fully into our body, feeling ourselves sitting on the chair or on the floor, wherever you may be right now, getting comfortable, being in a space where you're not going to be disturbed. And breathing easily and gently. Morning, Roger. Morning, Paolo. Morning, Joanna. And just closing your eyes, staying with the breath. And whatever sounds may be around you, just allow yourself to focus on the silence within. going to continue reading the last part of this chapter on awakening from Buddhism Without Beliefs. The actions that accompany the Four Truths describe the trajectory of Dharma practice. Understanding anguish leads to letting go of craving, which leads to realizing its cessation. Morning Len, morning Atik, morning Mike. Which leads to cultivating the path. These are not four separate activities, but four phases within the process of awakening itself. Understanding matures into letting go. Letting go culminates in realization. Realization impels cultivation. This trajectory is no linear sequence of stages through which we process. We do not leave behind an earlier stage in order to advance to the next rung or some hierarchy. All four activities are part of a single continuum of action. Morning Nick. Dharma practice cannot be reduced to any of them. It is configured from all of them. As soon as understanding is isolated from letting go, it degrades into mere intellectuality. As soon as letting go is isolated from understanding, it declines into spiritual posturing. The fabric of Dharma practice is woven from the threads of these interrelated activities, each of which is defined through its relation to the others. Wonderful, John. It's a beautiful book, as you can see. The Buddha's first discourse convinced the 5 ascetics that he was onto something, so they stayed with him, listened to his teaching, and came to awakening themselves. They too understood anguish, let go of craving, realized cessation, and embarked on the cultivation of the path. They too achieved freedom of heart and mind from the compulsions of craving. The words used to describe their awakening are the same as those to describe the Buddha's own. Henceforth, at the conclusion of Buddha's discourse, it would often be reported not only how many people had come to awakening through that particular teaching, but to what degree. The early discourses suggest that awakening was a common occurrence among those who listened to the Buddha and acted upon what he said. A difference in degree was acknowledged between those who had experienced the initial moment of awakening and entered the path, and those who had further cultivated the path and even reached the point where the habit of cravings was extinguished. But access to the process of awakening itself was relatively straightforward and did not entail any great fuss. Yet as Buddhism became institutionalized as a religion, awakening became progressively more inaccessible. Those who controlled the institutions maintained that awakening was so exalted that generally it could be attained only with the detachment and purity of heart achieved through monastic discipline. Even then they admitted it was rare. To explain this state of affairs, they appealed to the Indian idea of the degeneration of time, a notion that regards the course of history as a process of an inexorable decline. According to this notion, those who lived at the time of the Buddha were simply less degenerated, more spiritual than the corrupted mass of humanity today. That word spiritual is in speech marks because spiritual and spirituality is of course our nature, and it's a word that has been overused, overprocessed and imbued with lots of meaning and I am spiritual, you're not spiritual, all these kind of silliness. We are all spiritual. Spiritual is our nature. We don't need a word for our nature. We are our nature. There's nowhere to get for our nature. Our nature is right here now, as we sit and listen, as we meditate. Whatever we are doing is our nature. We simply are nature. And spirituality is nature. It is not separate. Spirituality is who we are. It is not a separate thing. There are those of us that are spiritual, those of us that are not spiritual. That's not true. That's an idea, a belief, a concept, something that's been constructed by society. Again, to create more barriers, more boundaries, more separation. It may be that some people are more interested in their nature, their true nature. But we all have different interests, we all have different desires, we all have different pulls. That's our uniqueness. We are all unique. And if we were all the same, what would the world look like? What would this reality be created as? We need our uniqueness, we need our differences to create the unity, to work together, come together. Creates the diversity of oneness. We couldn't know ourselves if we weren't more than one. We are a billion expressions of love in form, a billion expressions of nature. We all have our gifts. None is less spiritual than the other. None is more or less than the other. Just simply different, simply having a different experience. Some are actively seeking the path of awakening. Some are not. Some don't need to. Doesn't make them more or less. Just different. Just unique. We have all had many lifetimes here. And some of us choose when we don't want to come back anymore. The path of awakening. And we're all learning to get closer to God, that which we already are. Periodically, however, such views were challenged. The doors of awakening were thrown open to those barred from it by the structures and dogmas of a privileged elite. Laity, women, and the uneducated, the disempowered were invited to taste the freedom of the Dharma for themselves. Awakening was not a remote goal to be attained in a future lifetime. No, awakening was right here, unfolding in your own mind at this very moment. To put it bluntly, the central question Buddhists have faced from the beginning is this: is awakening close by or far away? Is it readily accessible or available only through supreme effort? If its proximity and ease of access are emphasized, there is a danger of trivializing it, of not according it the value and significance it deserves. Yet if its distance and difficulty of access are emphasized, there is a danger of placing it out of our reach, of turning it into an icon of perfection to be worshipped from afar. Doesn't the question itself deceive us? Aren't we tricked by either by its either or logic into assuming that only one option can be true. Couldn't the ambiguous logic of both and be more appropriate here? Awakening is indeed close by, and supreme effort is required to realize it. Awakening is indeed far away and readily accessible. Awakening is happening by grace alone, and by grace alone will you realize the truth of who you are, but it is not something that can be grasped, held onto. It is not some goal that is out there. It is not something that someone else has that you do not already have. We are by nature already awakened. It is our mind in this reality that makes us believe something else. Inquire into the truth of who you are. Start by asking yourself the question, who am I? There you will find all the answers you seek. Question everything. Accept nothing as truth until you have found the truth yourself. Your experience of awakening will be different to the experience of others. This is your uniqueness. But be sure of one thing, you are awakening. You have the desire within you to know the truth. And when we ask for answers, the answers are given to us effortlessly, in divine timing. There is no practice that you can do that will make anything happen any faster. There is no fast route. There is no slow route. Life is a process of awakening, and if you have the intention to awaken through grace, when you are ripe, you will fall into the arms of God. And only then, and only now, when you are ready. No amount of yoga, no amount of meditation, no amount of following anybody's ideas or worshipping anybody or anything will bring you there any faster. Because it is already here, there is no there to get to. It is the diamond in your pocket. It's right here, right now, and it always has been. You just need to look within. Turn your attention within. Question your reality. Question who you are. The answers are right here. Too much practice can be a crutch, can be a distraction to the mind. Can distract you from the truth. The purpose of life is awakening. All of our experiences leading us to the truth of who we are. Everything is pointing us there, here, now. If you are in any kind of pain, you will notice that the pain is leading you to this moment, bringing you right here. If you are in any kind of pain, you cannot be distracted by thoughts. It is the pain that consumes all of your energy and all of your thoughts. If you can be brave and courageous enough to look into that pain, you will see what is available to you in every moment. Everything we have been taught has been the opposite to how it is. The world outside of us is a reflection of what is going on inside of us. Much love to you all. Many, many blessings. If you have just tuned in, you can watch this from the beginning when I repost it. I think today's is quite a long session. I've been reading from Buddhism Without Beliefs, A Contemporary Guide to Awakening, and I've also read today's passage from the Eileen Caddy, Opening Doors Within. And we've done some silent meditation, so you can watch any part of this however you like, or watch it as a whole. Either way, it has the same effect. Much love to you all. Thank you for giving yourselves this space. Thank you for sharing this sacred space with me this morning. Many, many blessings.